So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Todd, and if you see me cowering back there, he's scaring me, so that's a good thing. Folks, Todd Reynolds. Please give Todd a round of applause.
Hi guys. So, my wife and I were talking about Halloween on the way over. We've had like 3 kids come by, which is a little disappointing. 3 Tootsie Rolls are gone, and the rest we've got to eat ourselves. Oh well. But we were talking about dressing up in costumes and how there was nothing when I was a little kid that made me more upset than having to put like a coat on over my costume if I got caught. My wife said she would rather be a fat princess than a princess wearing a coat. I thought that was kind of telling. But anyway, ghost stories. I've loved ghost stories since I was a little kid. My grandmother and great-grandmother were telling them to me, and the ones that I liked best were the ones that they always said were true, the things that had really happened to them. I just thought that meant that they were trying to make it a better story. Didn't really believe in that kind of stuff until something happened to me one time. Is that the one I should tell?
If you, whatever.
I was, come on in guys, you're just in time for some ghost stories. This was a long time ago, and anybody here know where Mount St. Joseph is? Well, I was going to Mount St. Joseph to see a concert, and it was, oddly enough, the Eastman School of Music's trombone choir. As entertaining as that sounds, they were actually better than I thought they would be. But anyway, when that was done, we had a brief reception, punch and cookies with the nuns, that kind of thing. And then we were driving back home, and it was my girlfriend and I, and we were driving through those windy West Louisville roads. We came around a corner and hit a straight stretch. And back in those days, I don't think it's still there, but back in those days, at the far end of this straight stretch, which was about a quarter of a mile, there were trees that grew out over the road, and they formed kind of a canopy. You felt almost like you were driving into a tunnel. We were going along about 35, 40 miles an hour. When we came into this straight stretch, my headlights reached out and they picked up a guy walking down the road. Everybody knows what that looks like. There's nothing scary about it. This guy was just walking along. His arms were swinging. His legs were moving. The only odd thing was that he was walking in the middle of my lane. He wasn't on the side of the road. It was like he was playing chicken with my car. I was 20 years old at the time, so I was going to say something smart alecky like, well, I guess if he doesn't get over, I'll just have to run over him. What I was really going to do was slow down and ease over into the other lane if he was drunk or whatever. I didn't want to pass out and accidentally run over somebody that was going too fast, too close. But right when I was going to do both of those things, I didn't wind up doing either of them because this guy started to float up into the air. His arms were still swinging, his legs were still moving, but he was going that way instead of that way. And of course I was just locked in at that moment. You know, I couldn't do anything. All my hair was standing up. It was like electricity was running through me. And just kept going. Didn't reduce speed, didn't do anything. This guy kept going up kind of smoothly until I was probably less than the length of this building away. He started to disappear up into the lower branches of these trees. And of course at 40 miles an hour, I was, you know, under him and passed pretty quick. Looked up in the rear view mirror to see if he was coming down, I guess. I don't know, I didn't see anything. But I turned to the girl that I was with and I said, "Did you see that?" She said, "Don't say anything, just get us out of here," which I took to mean yes, and so I did. We got back down. I didn't tell anybody about that. I didn't even talk to her about that for like 3 months after that. It was just too much for me to deal with, I think. So I sat on it for a while. Hi. Come on in, guys. And, you know, my mommy's here. I have no idea she was coming. But anyway, you know, who knows what that was, who it was. It was obviously aware of us because it got out of the way. But I've talked to several people who live out there, and nobody can tell me what that was. Or like most ghost stories, it doesn't have a nice, most real ghost stories. doesn't have a nice ending that you can tie up and figure it out. This is what happened. It just was. I work at the Museum of Science and History down the street, and there are several stories that go along with that place. It's a pretty interesting place to work. We hear a lot of sounds. Come on in. A lot of sounds, a lot of things moving around up there. You hear the sound of file cabinets opening and closing, and you go into an office and there's nobody there. The elevator comes up and opens on its own. A lot of that. There are, everybody or most folks here probably know, if you're from Owensboro, that used to be Anderson's department store. And a lot of folks think that Mrs. Anderson is still hanging around. There's a portrait of her and her husband as you get off the elevator on the 3rd floors. And an interesting story that goes along with those. Our curator of exhibits is Chris Norton, and he had come in a couple of Christmases ago to feed the animals that we have there. Nobody in the building, nobody had been there for a few days. He brought his dog, Lola, who was an English shepherd. She comes in and she likes to look around while he's busy. And as I said before, sometimes the elevators come down and open up on their own. And that happened with Lola, and she got in. Rode it up to the 3rd floor. She didn't push any buttons that we know of. It just went up there and let her off. And Chris didn't know where she was. In fact, he wasn't even thinking much about it. She just roams around when he takes her in there. There was nobody there for her to bother her. Until he heard the sound of Lola barking uncontrollably, like she was being accosted by somebody, like a dog trying to chase somebody out of its yard. It wasn't a friendly bark. He started looking around for her, couldn't find her. He was on the 1st floor. Finally, he finds her, he trails up the elevator and finds her standing with her hackles raised, and she is barking and growling at the portrait of Mrs. Anderson. Now, dogs aren't supposed to be able to see in the 2-dimensional world. They can't look at a picture and say that's a picture. So, what was it about that? There are dozens of portraits in the hallway. She was keyed on that one. A lot of folks feel like it follows you with, Mrs. Anderson follows you with her eyes when you're walking up there anyway. So Lola certainly didn't like her. We've had all kinds of things happen though. A lady was in the Playseum a few years, just a couple of years ago I guess, and she with her son alone, and he crawled into a little train that we got in there. It has a porthole window. She took his picture, and when she looked down in her digital camera, there was her son's face in the porthole, but there was another little boy's face looking over his shoulder. So she couldn't account for that. From Theater Workshop? Well, we can, I worked at River Park for a long time. Got a River Park story. A lot of folks say, well, River Park Center is built in '92. It can't be haunted, but, there were old buildings there before River Park was built. Who knows what was there before the old buildings were? So, how far back do you have to go to find something? But I was the tech director there for a long time, and one night I was finishing up on stage about 2 in the morning. And I was leaving, we had some kind of a civic event going on in the lobby, and I went up to tell them that I was leaving and found out that they were leaving too. So Ruth Baird, who was the volunteer coordinator at the time, said, well, just walk us out. So I did, and as we were walking across the lobby at River Park Center, we heard a sound. It was kind of like, and I turned around and we looked up on the mezzanine landings, and those double doors there was a door handle, kind of like this one that sticks out. It's not a doorknob, it's a handle. And the doors, they're double doors. One of the handles was going up and down. And Ruth said, Todd, you've locked somebody in Cannon Hall. I said, no, I didn't. She said, well, somebody's trying to get out the door. I said, Ruth, there's a panic bar on the other side of the door. And went out to just push the panic bar. I said, whoever's making that handle move is on this side of the door. Well, of course, her eyes went, woo. She and the other volunteer took off across the across the lobby. I kept walking, but I kept my eye on that door, and it kept doing it the whole time I was walking. Even when it passed out of my vision, I could still hear it making that sound. As I walked. I was interested. I was interested in what was going on.
What kind of stuff have you done with paranormal?
Well, I haven't really. I'm not a paranormal investigator. I like this stuff. I love folklore. I love collecting stories, and if anybody has some, I'd love to hear them. But Keith Age from the Sci-Fi Channel is a friend of mine, and so I've swapped stories with Keith, and I've kind of opened up the building, the theater workshop, and the museum for the local bluegrass paranormal guys and a group from Chicago. And, you know, they've had a couple of interesting things. The local guys put together a reveal like they do on TV. And they've heard a lot of little bumps and creaks, and to me that's the building and the AC. But one thing that they found that I couldn't really account for, and that was they didn't do an in-depth investigation where they were there all night. What I did was I let them leave their equipment overnight. They had trap cameras like you would use, you know, a hunter would use maybe. They had digital recorders. So they left digital recorders, hi guys, up in the 4th floor was one of the spots. Now that's just a storage area, workshop kind of place. And when they came to do the reveal for me several days later, there was the sound of old music, kind of like Muzak from the 60s maybe, on the recorder that had been in the 4th floor. It would come on, play for 20, 30 minutes, it went off and stayed off for several hours. Then you had another burst of about 10 minutes later on. The thing is, there's no Muzak in the building. There are no radios on the floor. There's no reason for that music to be there. That's in the Museum of Science and History, just down the street. So it's an interesting place. There are a lot of interesting places around here. Well, you know, I've heard that, but I don't know those stories. I wish I could share them with you. All
right, give Todd a round of applause. Thank you for coming out tonight.